I'm pleased to present the Kavanaugh Files.
Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details.
I'm not questioning that Dr. Ford may have been sexually assaulted by some person in some place at some time. But I have never done this to her or to anyone.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
100%.
I am innocent of this charge. I intend no ill will to Dr. Ford and her family. The other night, Ashley and my daughter Liza said their prayers, and little Liza, all 10 years old, said to Ashley, we should pray for the woman.
I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling.
I was not at the party described by Dr. Ford. This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation.
Are you a gang rapist?
No.
This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy.
I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school.
On September 27th, 2018, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Brett Kavanaugh both offered sworn testimony and faced questioning by members of the Senate Judiciary Committee and a designated proxy, Rachel Mitchell.
For a lot of people, this was a very memorable day. Do any of you remember where you were that day or what you were doing?
It's okay if you don't remember, but we do ask you that you turn to someone sitting close to you and share what you do remember from the day.
We're going to do the same thing up here, and then we'll come back to you in just a few minutes. So turn and talk.
You want to go first?
What?
Initially. No, I mean, it was like a...
To be honest, that like, you come right out and you're like,
Yeah, like the perspective.
Hi.
Yeah.
So my name is Susie Jane Hunt, and on September 27th, 2018, I was teaching in the morning, so I missed Dr. Ford's testimony, but then I ran home and I listened to Brett Kavanaugh on the radio, and I remember having a really surprising amount of sympathy for him.
I'm Robert Paxton Stevenson, and that morning I had a doctor's appointment, and I had lunch with my mom. And I think we talked about it a bit. Maybe we talked around the hearings, though we both knew they were going on that day.
I'm Stephanie Anderson, and that day I was at work doing a really menial task, so it gave me way too much time to think. And then I kind of like angrily power walked to a class that I just wasn't emotionally ready for.
My name is Scott Michael Morales, and I was at work, and I was able to actually stream a lot of the hearings throughout the day. Did a little bit of work here, listened to the hearings there, and I remember getting progressively more upset as the day went on.
I'm Annalisa Gutierrez, and I was home in Los Angeles for my mother's birthday, and we were watching together in the morning, and I left my bedroom to cry because I didn't want my mother to understand why I empathized with Dr. Ford.
My name is Daryl Embry, and to be honest, the hearings weren't even on my radar for the day. I kind of went throughout my day, and it kind of kept coming up in social media platforms, and then I was able to, at the end of the day, focus in on it and watch it and give it the attention it deserves.
Is there anyone who wants to share with us where they were that day or what they remember? Yes, please.
Wow.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I was actually interviewing a candidate for a communications and public affairs position, and his job was currently covering the court case, and it was very deflating, defeating to him, especially as he was trying to present himself in a very positive light.
Wow, thank you. Anyone else want to share? Yes, please.
I was watching later in the day, watching the hearings with my mom, which was really interesting. And then later in the day through the hearings, my dad came in, and there are two different perspectives, kind of had an impact on what I saw.
Thank you for sharing. Yes.
I was teaching high school for the first time near Palo Alto, California, where Dr. Ford was teaching, and all the kids just wanted to stop everything and scream it, and had various friends throughout the day tell me about their sexual assaults in college.
Wow, so it opened up whole new conversations. I think that was a lot of people's experiences. Thank you so much for sharing. So now that we're all back to that day, we're going to explain a little about what's going to happen next. So what you're about to experience is a reenactment of 5 moments from that Senate Judiciary hearing on September 27, 2018.
We've studied the video, audio, and written transcripts of the hearings that day.
And we performed these people verbatim.
Word for word and gesture for gesture.
But there's a twist.
In each moment of our reenactment, we've switched the gender of at least one of the participants in the interaction.
Now, you may have strong feelings about the participants in these hearings based on your prior knowledge.
But what happens when Christine Blasey Ford becomes a man?
Or stays a woman.
But she's questioned by a male version of Rachel Mitchell.
What happens when Brett Kavanaugh's emotional outbursts come from a woman?
Or Lindsey Graham's.
Or when a female Brett Kavanaugh asks a male Amy Klobuchar about drinking.
When necessary, we've changed the names of the speakers and other people mentioned in the testimonies to accommodate for the change in gender and context.
We selected names that preserve the rhythm and cadence of the original speech patterns of the original speakers.
We've changed the pronouns to match the genders of the new speakers, but otherwise, we performed the text entirely verbatim, including the original speakers' pauses, interruptions, and stumbles.
We want to be clear, this is not a satire or a comic sketch. We love SNL, but it's not what we do.
This is a theatrical experiment to see what happens to your perception and understanding of the interactions during these hearings when the gender of the selected speakers is changed.
Yeah, and how does that changed gender of the speaker affect your experience of the emotions that were on display throughout the remarks?
And you'll get some context for each section as we'll play some audio from the moment before.
Okay, are you ready? Okay, so are we.
I am no one's pawn. Concerning Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the New York Times' Peter Baker wrote,
For a dozen days, Dr. Blasey had been an abstraction rather than a person, the focal point of one of the most polarized debates in a polarized Capitol without anyone having seen her, met her, or heard her. But on Thursday, she became a very human being, telling a terrible story about Judge Kavanaugh in compelling terms that brought many women to tears and transformed the battle for the Supreme Court.
At 10:32 a.m., 28 minutes into the hearing, Dr. Ford is sworn in. Her opening remarks last for 17 minutes and 55 seconds. Our version begins 15 minutes and 26 seconds into her opening statement, and we've used the name Gail Donahue in place of Brett Kavanaugh.
I decided to speak out publicly to a journalist who had originally responded to the tip I had sent to the Washington Post and who had gained my trust. It was important for me to describe the details of the assault in my own words. Since September 16th, the date of the Washington Post story, I have experienced an outpouring of support from people in every state of this country.
Thousands and thousands of people who have had their lives dramatically altered by sexual violence have reached out to share their experience and have thanked me for coming forward. We have received tremendous support from our friends and our community. At the same time, my greatest fears have been realized, and the reality has been far worse than what I expected. My family and I have been the target of constant harassment and death threats, and I have been called the most vile and hateful names imaginable. These messages, while far fewer than the expressions of support, have been terrifying and have rocked me to my core. People have posted my personal information and that of my parents online on the internet. This has resulted in additional emails, calls, and threats. My family and I were forced to move out of our home. Since September 16th, my family and I have been visiting in various secure locales, at times separated and at times together, with the help of security guards. This past Tuesday evening, my work email was hacked and messages were sent out trying to recant my description of the sexual assault. Apart from the assault itself, these past couple of weeks have been the hardest of my life. I've had to relive this trauma in front of the world, and I've seen my life picked apart by people on television, on Twitter, other social media, other media, and in this body who have never met me or spoken with me. I have been accused of acting out of partisan political motives. Those who say that do not know me. I am an independent person and I am no one's pawn. My motivation in coming forward was to be helpful and to provide facts about how Mrs. Donahue's actions have damaged my life, so that you could take into a serious consideration as you make your decision about how to proceed. It is not my responsibility to determine whether Mrs. Donahue deserves to sit on the Supreme Court. My responsibility is to tell you the truth. I understand that a professional prosecutor has been hired to ask me questions, and I'm committed to doing my very best to answer them. I have never been questioned by a prosecutor, and I will do my best. At the same time, because the committee members will be judging my credibility, I do hope to be able to engage directly with each of you, and at this time, I will do my best to answer your questions, and would request some caffeine.
This is not a cognitive interview. Much was made of the Republicans' choice to hire Rachel Mitchell, a female prosecutor from Arizona, to question Dr. Ford. The date of the hearings did fall nearly 27 years to the day after Anita Hill's testimony before an entirely male Senate Judiciary Committee in October of 1991. On September 26, 2018, Corinne Ramey and Jacob Gershman of the Wall Street Journal wrote the following.
While Ms. Mitchell has specialized in sensitive legal work throughout her career, largely spent in Maricopa County, she has never faced such intense national scrutiny. Those who have known Ms. Mitchell in Arizona describe her as caring, competent, and fair. A Republican, she isn't known for being visibly political, say people who know her professionally.
You're not going to have a Perry Mason moment,
Said Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery, referring to the fictional defense attorney.
Rachel is not going to pound away on people trying to break them down. When you're being respectful of individuals like this, you're going to pursue the truth.
At 2:45 p.m., 4 hours and 12 minutes into the hearing, Rachel Mitchell begins her final questioning of Dr. Ford. Our version changes the gender of Mitchell.
Okay. And when you did leave that night, did Leland Kaiser, now Kaiser, ever follow up with you and say, hey, what happened to you?
I've had communications with her recently.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking about like the next day.
Oh, no, she didn't know about the event. She was downstairs during the event, and I did not share it with her.
Okay.
Are you aware that the three people at the party besides yourself and Brett Kavanaugh have given statements under penalty of felony to the committee?
Yes.
And are you aware what those statements say?
Yes.
Are you aware that they say that they have no memory or knowledge of such a party?
Yes.
Okay. Do
you have any particular motivation to ascribe to Leland?
I guess we can take those one at a time. Leland has significant health challenges, and I'm happy that she's focusing on herself and getting the health treatment that she needs. And she let me know that she leaded her lawyer to take care of this for her, and she texted me right afterward with an apology and good wishes and etc. So I'm glad that she's taking care of herself. I don't expect that PJ and Leland would remember this evening. It was a very unremarkable party. It was not one of their more notorious parties because nothing remarkable happened to them that evening. They were downstairs. And Mr. Judge is a different story. I would expect that he would remember that this happened.
Understood. Senator Harris just questioned you from the Maricopa County Protocol on Sexual Assault. That's the paper she was holding up. Are you aware that, I've been really impressed today because you've talked a lot about norepinephrine and cortisol and so what we call in the profession, basically the neurobiological effects of trauma. Have you also educated yourself on the best way to get to memory and truth in terms of interviewing victims of trauma?
For me, interviewing victims of trauma?
No, the best way to do it, the best practices for interviewing victims of trauma.
No.
Okay. Would you believe me if I told you that there's no study that says that this setting in 5-minute increments is the best way to do that? We can stipulate to that. Okay. Thank you, counsel. Did you know that the best way to do it is to have a trained interviewer talk to you one-on-one in a private setting and to let you do the talking, just let you do a narrative? Did you know that?
That makes a lot of sense.
Does make a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then to follow up, obviously to fill in the details and to ask for clarification. Does that make sense as well?
Yes.
And the research is done by a lot of people in the child abuse field. Two of the more prominent ones in the sexual assault field are Giesel and Fisher, who talked about it. And it's called a cognitive interview. This is not a cognitive interview. Did anybody ever advise you, from Senator Feinstein's office or from Representative Eshu's office, to go get a forensic interview?
No.
Instead, you were advised to get an attorney and take a polygraph. Is that right?
Many people advised me to get an attorney. Once I had an attorney, my attorney and I discussed using the polygraph.
And instead of submitting to an interview in California, we're having a hearing here today in 5-minute increments. Is that right?
I agree that's what was agreed upon by the collegial group here.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
At 2:41 p.m., 4 hours and 21 minutes since she was sworn in, Dr. Ford's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee comes to an end. The committee adjourns for a short recess. A hint, a whiff. In an article for New York Magazine, Heather Haperleski wrote,
Imagine that a woman accused of a crime shows up for a Senate hearing and mostly cries and shouts about how persecuted she feels. Imagine she loses her temper several times during her opening statement and refused to answer yes or no questions.
We don't have to imagine it. We can do it. Brett Kavanaugh begins his opening statement at 3:10 p.m., 5 hours and 5 minutes into the hearing, and that statement lasts 44 minutes and 38 seconds. Our version begins 9 minutes and 37 seconds into his remarks. For our purposes, Brett Kavanaugh becomes Gail Donahue, Dr. Ford becomes Dr. Grant, and referenced family members' names have been changed as well.
Allegations of sexual assault must always be taken seriously, always. Those who make allegations always deserve to be heard. At the same time, the person who is the subject of the allegations also deserves to be heard. Due process is a foundation of the American rule of law. Due process means listening to both sides. As I told you in my hearing 3 weeks ago, I'm the only child of Nancy and Bob Donahue. They're here today. When I was 10, my mom went to law school. And as a lawyer, she worked hard and overcame barriers, including the workplace sexual harassment that so many women faced at that time and still face today. She became a trailblazer, one of Maryland's earliest women prosecutors and trial judges. She and my dad taught me the importance of equality and respect for all people, and she inspired me to be a lawyer and a judge. Last time I was here, I told you that when my mom was a prosecutor and I was in high school, she used to practice her closing arguments at the dining room table on my dad and me. As I told you, her trademark line was, "Use your common sense. What rings true? What rings false?" Her trademark line is a good reminder as we sit here today, some 36 years after the alleged event occurred, when there is no corroboration, and indeed it is refuted by the people allegedly there. After I've been in the public arena for 26 years without even a hint, a whiff of an allegation like this. And when my nomination to the Supreme Court was just about to be voted on, at a time when I'm called evil by a Democratic member of this committee, while Democratic opponents of my nomination say people will die if I am confirmed. This onslaught of last-minute allegations does not ring true. I'm not questioning that Dr. Grant may have been sexually assaulted by some person in some place at some time, but I have never done this to him or to anyone. That's not who I am. It is not who I was. I am innocent of this charge. I intend no ill will to Dr. Grant and his family. The other night, Arthur and my daughter Hannah said their prayers, and little Hannah, all of 10 years old, said to Arthur, we should pray for the man. It's a lot of wisdom from a 10-year-old. We mean no ill will.
This is hell. When reporting on the Kavanaugh hearings on FoxNews.com, Adam Shaw wrote,
Lindsey Graham has long been known as one of the more bipartisan Republican senators, breaking ranks to vote with Democrats and coming to the table to work out deals, particularly on immigration. Such stances have frequently gotten him into trouble with the base, labeling him a rhino, or a Republican in name only. Graham's outburst at the hearing drew immediate praise from the White House as well. Counselor Kellyanne Conway praised Graham for
excoriating the outrageous and unfair treatment of Kavanaugh.
And while Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders tweeted that Graham
has more decency and courage than every Democratic member of the committee combined, God bless him. At 4:45, Senator Lindsey Graham asks the chair for the floor, 1 hour and 35 minutes into Judge Kavanaugh's testimony, and 6 hours and 40 minutes into the hearing. For our version, the gender of Senator Graham has been changed, but all other players stay the same.
Did you meet with Senator Dianne Feinstein on August 20th?
I did meet with Senator Feinstein.
Did you know that her staff had already recommended a lawyer to Dr. Ford?
I did not know that.
Did you know that her and her staff had this allegations for over 20 days?
I did not know that at the time.
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us. What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020.
You said that, not me. You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Leslie said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy. Are you a gang rapist?
No.
I cannot imagine what you and your family have gone through. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham, that you knew about it and you held it. You had no intention of protecting Dr. Ford. None. She's as much of a victim as you are. God, I hate to say it because these have been my friends. But let me tell you, when it comes to this, you're looking for a fair process, you came to the wrong town at the wrong time, my friend. Do you consider this a job interview?
I've been under the advice and consent role.
Do you consider that you've been through a job interview?
I've been through the advice and consent role in the Constitution.
Would you say you've been through hell?
I've been through hell and then some.
This is not a job interview.
Yeah.
This is hell.
This
is going to destroy the ability of good people to come forward because of this crap. Your high school yearbook. You have interacted with professional women all your life, not one accusation. You're supposed to be Bill Cosby when you're a junior and senior in high school. And all of a sudden you got over it. It's been my understanding that if you drug women and rape them for 2 years in high school, you probably don't stop. Here's my understanding. If you've lived a good life, people would recognize it, like the American Bar Association has the gold standard. His integrity is absolutely unquestioned. He is very circumspect in his personal conduct, harbors no biases or prejudices. He's entirely ethical, is a really decent person. He is warm, friendly, unassuming. He's the nicest person. The ABA. Now, the one thing I can tell you should be proud of, Ashley, you should be proud of this, that you raised a daughter who had the good character to pray for Dr. Ford. To my Republican colleagues, if you vote no, you're legitimizing the most despicable thing I have seen in my time in politics. You want this seat? I hope you never get it. I hope you're on the Supreme Court. That's exactly where you should be. And I hope that the American people will see through this charade. And I wish you well. And I intend to vote for you. And I hope everybody who's fair-minded will.
Drinking is one thing. On September 28, 2018, Amber Phillips of the Washington Post cited Senator Amy Klobuchar's questioning of Brett Kavanaugh as
one of the most 5 moments from the Kavanaugh hearing that have both sides buzzing.
At 5:01 p.m., 1 hour and 42 minutes into his testimony and 6 hours and 56 minutes into the hearing, Senator Amy Klobuchar begins her questioning of Judge Kavanaugh. Our version switches the gender of both speakers and of Judge Kavanaugh's college roommates. Names have been changed to reflect these new genders, with Senator Klobuchar becoming Senator Brankovich.
And I note that President George Bush, in the Anita Hill Justice Thomas case, he opened up the FBI investigation and let questions being asked. And I think it was helpful for people. So was his decision reasonable?
I don't know the circumstances of that. What I know, Senators,
The circumstances are that he opened up the investigation so the FBI could ask some questions. That's what he opened up the background check.
I'm here to answer questions about my yearbook or about, what I...
Okay.
My sports or, summer
I'm not going to ask.
basketball.
I'm not going to ask about the yearbook. So most people have done some drinking in high school and college. Many people even struggle with alcoholism and binge drinking. My own dad struggled with alcoholism most of his life, and he got in trouble for it, and there were consequences. He is still in AA at age 90, and he's sober. And in his words, he was pursued by grace, and that's how he got through this. So in your case, you have said here and other places that you never drank so much that you didn't remember what happened. But yet we have heard, not under oath, but we have heard your college roommate say that you did drink frequently. These are in news reports, that you would sometimes be belligerent. Another classmate said it's not credible for you to say that you didn't have memory lapses. So drinking is one thing.
I actually don't think that's the second quote's correct. On the first quote, if you wanted, I provided some material that's still redacted about the situation with the freshman year roommate, and I don't really want to repeat that in a public hearing, but just so you know, there were 3 people in a room, Jill Green, Cindy Fox, and me, and it was a contentious situation where Cindy did not like Jill Green, at all. And I'm in this.
Okay.
Jill Green came back from home one weekend, and Cindy Fox had moved all her furniture out into the courtyard, and so she walks in, and so that's your source on that.
Okay, so drinking is one thing,
and there's much more in the look at the redacted portion of what I said. I don't want to repeat that in a public hearing.
Could I just ask one more question?
Redacted information about that.
Okay, so drinking is one thing, and in your written testimony, you said you sometimes had too many drinks. So was there ever a time when you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened or part of what happened the night before?
No, I remember what happened, and I think you've probably had beers, Senator, and so's my...
So you're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know, have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? So you have... That's not happened, is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
Okay, thank you.
According to Peter Baker and Nicholas Fandos of the New York Times,
White House counsel Don McGahn told Kavanaugh during a short recess following that initial exchange that he had to dial it back and strike a calmer tone. When he returned to the committee room, Judge Kavanaugh moderated his anger and apologized to Senator Klobuchar.
At 5:28 p.m., following a short recess, Judge Kavanaugh asks for the opportunity to make a statement concerning his interaction with Senator Klobuchar. Judge, are you ready?
I am ready, and can I say one thing?
Yes.
Just going to say, I started my last colloquy by saying to Senator Brankovich how much I respected him and respected what he did in the last hearing, and he asked me a question at the end that I responded by asking him a question, and I didn't. Sorry I did that. This is a tough process. I'm sorry about that.
I appreciate that. I would like to add that when you have a parent that's an alcoholic, you're pretty careful about drinking. And the second thing is I was truly just trying to get to the bottom of the facts and the evidence, and I, again, believe we do that by opening up an FBI investigation. I would call it a background check instead of an investigation. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
At 3 hours and 34 minutes since he was sworn in, Judge Kavanaugh's testimony before the Judiciary Committee comes to an end. At 6:44 p.m., the session adjourns 8 hours and 39 minutes from where it started.
The following day, September 28th, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted 11-10 to send the nomination to the Senate floor pending a week-long FBI investigation into the background of Judge Kavanaugh.
On October 6th, 2018, as outlined in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution of the United States.
The Senate held the vote to confirm Judge Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court.
Are there any senators in the chamber who wish to vote or change a vote? If not, on this vote, the ayes are 50, the nays are 48. The nomination of Brett M. Kavanaugh of Maryland to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
While the set gets changed, I want to introduce our two facilitators for the conversation that will follow. We have with us, of course, Joe Salvatore, Associate Professor of Educational Theater at Steinhardt and Director of the Verbatim Performance Lab. He's also an alumnus of the Lincoln Center Directors Lab and member of the Dramatists Guild and the American Alliance of Theater Education. He will be joined by our also NYU law professor, Melissa Murray. She is also co-director at the Law Center of the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network. She's a leading expert on family law, constitutional law, and reproductive rights. Her research is at the center of issues about the legal regulation of intimate behavior. I believe she herself testified as part of the hearing and the hearing record for Brett Kavanaugh. And I think I noticed as well, you also clerked for Judge Sotomayor, I think as well. So both Professor Salvatore and Professor Murray will, I think, come up on the stage and sort of lead a discussion and evince your reaction and opinion. And I'm sure they won't mind if from time to time you go to the back for your own refreshments and to stay fortified for what will be a very meaty conversation.
So please have some food as we start this. But what we want to do, first of all, Melissa, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to be here and with you. We just would like for you, in the same way at the beginning we asked you to turn and talk, I'd like for you to we invite you to take some time just to share with someone or take your own moment to reflect on what you just experienced. Considering those questions at the beginning, what happens for you when the gender of the speaker is flipped? How does that affect your experience of the emotions? And it could also be just something that you found surprising, or maybe something that you believed before this event started has been confirmed by what you've just seen. So we invite you to have a conversation. We'll come back to you in 3 minutes or so, 3 to 5 minutes.
All right, so keep getting your chips and drinks and things, and we're curious to hear. I think we have a microphone here on the floor, and so if you just put your hand in the air, we will be able to get a mic to you because we'd love to be able for the whole room to hear your thoughts. So we're going to start, just so you know how this is going to work. We're going to start with some comments from you. And then I'm going to ask for Melissa to share some comments that she has based on her experience and also your comments. And then we will eventually bring the actors back out on stage to answer questions about the process. All right, so that's how the evening will unfold. So, thoughts? Yeah, right over here.
We were talking about the recasting of Lindsey Graham, and we both had different takes on it, but I felt like I was brought back to like Mommy Dearest, or like, is Lindsey Graham a star of the silver screen? Like, it was so histrionic and kind of drag. Like, is what I thought about it. And you spoke about the age.
Yeah, I didn't find that the gender swap was as shocking as like the age swap, almost the way Lindsay was speaking, coming from someone so much younger. I don't know someone her age who would say like, you're not going to come into this town looking for just, you know what I mean? It seemed like a very odd phrase.
Yes, there's a very cowboy quality to that moment, isn't there? Yes, yeah. Okay, good, thank you. Other thoughts? Yeah, back here. Great. Yep. Lily, thank you for being our mic runner. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much, Lily.
Yep.
I was curious as to why they felt they needed to switch names. Like a gender had to be a different name. Why couldn't they have just been the characters they were portraying?
So that's a great question, and the reason that we make those changes is because, for example, if a woman is playing Brett Kavanaugh and is referring to the sort of the circumstances around her, it feels like it doesn't necessarily make logical sense, okay? And so within the context of the world of this particular incident. And so we choose to change the names to kind of create a second reality that maintains the circumstances, but actually takes it into a different realm. And so this question has been asked before when we've done this, and I'm fine if the name change works or if it doesn't work. Part of it not working, if it does not work in your sort of experience of the play, part of the purpose of the play is to have you sit up and pay attention, or maybe go, why did they change the names? Because it actually takes you more into an analytical mode. So I'm glad you asked the question, because that's kind of what was supposed to happen. So thank you. And then we'll come back to you here.
I guess that character struck me also, the Lindsey Graham character. You said there wasn't going to be a Perry Mason moment, but there was something to the way that character went into great oratory, had a prepared speech, had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and shamed his colleagues into coming along with him, that I thought was almost like he won the day. He convinced his colleagues and shamed them into voting a certain way. And I guess I'm uncomfortable with what I'm coming away with, in that I think the very nice, sweet, and honest and sincere Dr. Ford, she was punished for being sweet and demure and polite, and he was not.
And when the first character you're talking about is the Lindsey Graham character. Yes. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Let's go here and then here and then here, and then maybe we'll ask Melissa to share some thoughts as well.
I'd like to ask the professor if I can update to the current moment. The Times article last weekend, which I think smeared Justice Kavanaugh, was picked up by Senators Warren and Harris, for example, who joined a bandwagon calling for the impeachment of the justice. I'd like to ask the professor what she thinks the high crime or misdemeanor would be upon which an impeachment proceeding could be brought into the Senate.
We're venturing a little far afield of the original topic, which seems pretty typical for most NYU classes. So I think
yes.
The standard for high crimes and misdemeanors is obviously explicit in the Constitution, but is nowhere defined in the text of the Constitution. So we've relied on interpretation to actually get to a standard. And it's my understanding, given the nature of the allegations and the fact of the confirmation hearings, that if there were to be impeachment proceedings that go forward, the nature of the high crime or the misdemeanor would be lying under oath, or basically obstruction of justice or perjury. So it wouldn't necessarily be high crimes and misdemeanors because of the fact of what had happened 36 years ago, but rather what happened in the Senate Judiciary Chamber during the confirmation process. That's my understanding.
Do you want to go ahead and share your, since we've transitioned, that would be great.
Sure. So first, I actually thought the complete flip of gender and the adoption of different names is actually very successful, because otherwise I think if you just had people saying Brett Kavanaugh or Christine Blasey Ford while being in a different gender, I think it could have had a little bit of a kind of drag quality that would have diminished from the verisimilitude of the whole event. So I thought it was actually really interesting to get you to focus on what does it mean to have a woman manspreading and blustering and chewing a plug of tobacco, it seems, and saying these things. And what does it mean to have a woman, a young woman, talking like Foghorn Leghorn and, jabbing at his colleagues? And would we have accepted that performance from someone of that gender? So I think in that sense, the flip, it was necessary to adopt the different names in order to make that alternative counterfactual really work. I should say that I did testify in the confirmation hearings. I testified, I believe, on September 5th. I was a witness in what was supposed to be the explosive day of the hearings, when we were going to talk about Judge Kavanaugh's record on reproductive rights and justice and his views on executive power. And I was there to testify about his record as a judge on the DC Circuit. Obviously, that was not the most explosive day of the confirmation hearings, but it was a pretty normal confirmation hearing up until that point. I went in there, I had known Brett Kavanaugh professionally for a number of years. I had had lunch with him. All of the things that were said, he was, warm, personable, funny, all of that was true. I liked him as a person in our professional interactions. I went to testify against him because I felt that his record on reproductive rights was inconsistent with extant Supreme Court precedent on those topics. I was not prepared for what followed in the weeks after I gave my testimony. I've never seen anything like this. I was around for the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill confirmation hearings, but even this, I don't think we ever had a situation where a nominee to the Supreme Court not only defended himself publicly in the confirmation process, but also went on Fox News and had an interview with his wife, and then also published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal defending himself. And so, there was a kind of multimedia quality to this, and a multimedia defense that I think was both striking and a little jarring for an institution like the Supreme Court that's really supposed to be more removed from the fray.
We actually looked at that interview with his wife and him on Fox News, and you bringing it up makes me think maybe we should go revisit it again, because and also she actually gets to speak, not a whole lot, but she gets to speak in that interview. So it is. I wake up every morning and there's more material to do, right, in the style of work that we do in the lab. And so, but this, I was saying to Melissa before, as this was happening the day of the hearings, I was getting text messages saying, what are you going to do about this? Because people know that I do work like this. And I thought, oh, well, I guess I should do something about it. And then the first person I asked to do it was Susie Hunt, who plays Kavanaugh, or the female version of Kavanaugh, and then she helped my co-creator Keith Huff and I to choose material, because we felt like as two guys, we can't just choose this material because of what the material is about. And so we needed to have that collaboration and making decisions about what would make sense to explore, not just from our perspective. And so I'm curious, what happens when you see, since it was such a big deal in the news, when a man interviews Christine Blasey Ford, when a male version of Rachel Mitchell interviews Christine Blasey Ford?
So as you saw in the play, the decision to have Rachel Mitchell from Maricopa County interview Christine Blasey Ford was a very calculated decision and a response to the incredible pushback the Republican Party had gotten, Joe Biden and the entire Senate Judiciary Committee from 1991 had gotten when the all-male committee had interviewed and interrogated Anita Hill. So they did not want the optics of that again, and so the idea was instead to have a female prosecutor ask the questions, questions that had been given to her in part from the staffers of each senator, but also questions, the Republican senators selected her, the Democratic senators all asked their own questions of her. But she was fed these questions and then she came up with some on her own. And I think she was a really sort of interesting pick because she's sort of grandmotherly, very sort of warm, unassuming. And I don't think I recognized until I saw a man asking the questions that they were really targeted and laser sharp questions. I mean, she had a way, her demeanor, her physicality had a way of blunting the force of each of those questions. And hearing it coming from a man's voice was actually quite jarring. And I could pinpoint, like, oh, I see what she's doing. It's not a soft soaping like it seemed like. I mean, it was actually much more directed and targeted. And the shift in gender made that much more clear. And also revealed like that was a really effective strategy for the GOP. I mean, like they came off like they were not trying to beat her up, and she didn't seem like she was beating her up.
One of the interesting things that we discovered in rehearsing that and studying the clips of her interviewing is she takes up a lot of space, and it didn't. And she's at a very small table, right? But she spreads out when she asks the questions. And I didn't
manspread.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't notice that until Scott started to do it. And I thought, oh, wow, she's taking up more space.
She also took a lot of liberties that most women would not take in a professional setting like that. I mean, I've been in the law for almost 20 years now. Even in today's setting, women in the law are still a minority. It's a very male-dominated profession, even as you see more and more representation, even as law schools are more than 50% women in the entering class these days. It's still a very male-oriented profession, especially in the sort of litigation world. When she stops to take that long draw off the iced tea, no woman would ever do this in open court, ever. Like just suck on a straw in the middle of open court. It's just unheard of. In the same way you wouldn't drink from a water bottle. You pour it into a glass, it'd be very decorous. She was acting like a man in a lot of ways, but her physicality allowed that to be more muted.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like a Dunkin' Donuts cup that she's got, and so yeah, it's. And then I'm curious, having had lunch with Brett Kavanaugh, and then sort of.
He ate a very raw hamburger. It was incredibly raw. It was very rare, and I was surprised. I was like, it just surprised me.
Yeah.
I had chicken.
Yeah. And you talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious I'm struck by the manspreading, that it does become very clear when it's in a different body, right? Does that play at all in person or?
So we had lunch, there's three of us. One of my colleagues from Berkeley, I was at Berkeley at the time, and Judge Kavanaugh, and we were oriented around a horseshoe-shaped table and with him in the middle. And I don't think he took up a lot of space. I mean, usually at a small table like that, everyone's knees are bumping up against each other. I didn't feel that at all. I mean, So I actually thought this was unusual. When I saw it on TV, I was like, wow, he's spread out. He's on the couch. And I wonder if that was calculated, a kind of not just entitlement to occupy that space, but when he talks about it, just as my confirmation is about to go through, I mean, there's a kind of entitlement to the ultimate outcome of this process. And you did not pick this part of the hearings to highlight, but the part that always stood out to me, having gone to Yale Law School many years after he did, was when he talked about how I worked my tail off to get to Yale Law School. And like, this was somehow exceptional. Like, everyone at Yale Law School worked their tail off to get there. They take like 150 people. Like, everyone is working hard to get there. But I mean, he said it as though it were somehow exceptional and marked him as not only the rightful occupant of that seat, but a future seat as well.
Yes, please. There's a question or a comment right here. Let's go right here, please. And then we'll bring the actors out, and just standby actors, and Keith will bring you out in just a minute.
With enormous respect and gratitude for the actor who played Kavanaugh, I have to tell you that there is an indelible memory of Kavanaugh's face as he was talking, and the crying and the thing. It was so obvious what he was doing. And so, in fact, we are now going to look at that aspect of what he did, hopefully, in terms of the fact that he didn't tell the truth, and he so revealed it. And so it was not a male-female thing. It was a man in terror of losing his territory.
Thank you. Okay, so so actors, are you there? Let's bring you out. And Keith, please. So if you would welcome the actors back out on stage, please. And they'll join us.
You come up.
And so if you have questions or thoughts that you would like to share, we do this in this phase when we do this work and have a conversation with an audience, because we found that the audience sometimes is more honest with their responses when the actors aren't with us for the first part of it, and then we bring the actors in to talk about their process if you have questions or if you have comments that you want to share with them. And it's an open conversation, so feel free.
Okay, I know we kind of talked a little bit about the process in class, but I just want to hear from the actors, like what exactly did you do when you found out that you were going to be part of the lab? Like, how did it work step by step? I know that might be a lot, but yeah, I just want to know.
So yeah, I can speak to it. Maybe we all can if you want to. Keith and Joe do a lot of work beforehand, before we even start rehearsing with them. And they give us a scored, or not necessarily scored, is it scored? Okay. Transcript of the verbatim words that have been spoken by our person that we're performing. And it's broken down with hard returns whenever there's a pause. And then we go in and further score it with whatever kind of symbols we want to notate where the breaths are, where the swallows are, where the gestures are, the looking up, whatever our person does. And they all do different things. And then it's a matter of watching the video with that transcript in front of us, listening to the recording on the subway for hours on end, and yeah, just doing it with the video in front of us and with someone watching us so they can give notes.
Can I add to that? Yeah. Was my mic on? Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, I think the other part of that is after we sort of think about the technical things of it, right, the gestures and the inflection, then we have to do our acting work, right? We have to say, like, why are they swallowing there? Or how do we justify that shift when they do that? Or why are they looking up there and why are they looking to the right there, right? And we don't know, right? That's not in the text. So we have to sort of fill in the magic if, right, as an actor to say, to make this person try and be as three-dimensional as possible, right? So that's where it gets to be a challenge to sort of work from the outside in,
right?
But those and the breaks and all those things, they're gifts. I think it's really interesting as an actor because, exactly, like when they say those or when they have those breaks, you can go through and be like, oh, they're trying to figure out what to say next, or they didn't mean it like that. They mean it like, oh, it's literally. I always compare it to Shakespeare, the way that Shakespeare is scored. The pentameter of it is that you can literally see what the thinking is just the way that it's written or scored in this case.
It's a map. You make a map of it for yourself, right? And it is a lot like Shakespeare. It's an outside-in sort of, here's what they're doing exactly and what they sound like. So then the next step Daryl's talking about is why. Yeah. Thanks, Mary Kate.
So we kind of talked about this a little bit before the actors came on, but as most everyone knows, the call to impeach Kavanaugh was kind of revitalized this week. So going into this performance, did that change your mindset at all? Did that change your where you were going into this performance? How did that affect the actors?
Absolutely. I procrastinated working on this again. I really did, because it was just so hard. It's never that easy getting back into this, especially if you individually don't entirely believe everything you're saying, but you have to put that to the side. But yeah, it's interesting with the Verbatim Performance Lab. I think we're conjuring something here because we did Matt Lauer, Kellyanne Conway interview, I don't know, was that a year ago or so? 2 years ago, wow, 2 years ago, and then literally a couple weeks after that, the Matt Lauer thing was revealed, and it's wild. It just seems like these things just keep happening. Like you said, the material's going to keep happening. So, yeah, personally, it did affect me for sure.
No, it did. I didn't. I don't think it changed anything for me, Alex. There's a weird thing that's happened for me with Kavanaugh where I'm able to kind of commit to the genuine emotions that I have discovered that I believe he is expressing, and separating that from some sort of judgment that I may have made of him, if that makes any sense. It's not easy.
I mean, one of the hardest parts is not to comment as the actor, right? And so when we say at the top of the play, like, this is not an SNL sketch, right? Oftentimes I say, oh yeah, this is the kind of work I do. And they're like, oh, you do those skits like on Saturday Night Live. And no, that's not what I do. Like, they are studying and investigating people down to like how they're breathing. And so when we film these investigations, our stage manager, Cassie, starts the clock when we start to speak, and when we call cut, she stops the clock, and we match it to the original artifact. And she also tracks verbal misses as we go. And so the take, if you go online and look at these, they're all available online as videos. The take that's there is a single take. It's not a cut take. And it's the take that comes the closest to the original artifact in time with the least number of verbal misses. And so the level of precision that they're doing this at, it's a different way of approaching creating character, okay? Because it relies on precision and objective observation. And I think the objective part is what Susie's getting at, and I think that's probably the hardest part of this work. Like, when you laugh during a Graham moment, or when you laugh during the interaction between Klobuchar and Kavanaugh, like when he's all doing his thing about the drinking, usually an actor would give space for that laugh, or they would react and sort of maybe crank the comedy. And in this style, they can't do that because they are tied to the verbatim quality of it. And so it really is scientific in that way, I think, which, I mean, when in the arts do we talk about science? But it really is scientific in sort of the study of what we call them ethno-actors, as a link to ethnography, which is what anthropologists do in terms of studying behavior, studying culture.
And that's a great segue to ask, maybe this is for Joe and Keith, but I like the actors too. It was certainly understandable why you picked Kavanaugh and Ford and the prosecutor. You had quite a choice among the senators in terms of how you looked at that tableau. So it was one, what was behind that choice, and then maybe gets at it. So it was interesting to me to watch the two you chose. Graham, probably the most histrionic, let's just call it that. Klobuchar, interestingly, the most dramatic, maybe, in a more humane way, with her own backstory that she was able to bring to the foreground. There was, all foreground in Lindsay. Klobuchar got to have a backstory that she brought back and forth. So just the choice, because you had a lot of people who all think they're important on the Senate Judiciary Committee, as Professor Murray knows, and what was behind that choice, and then your observations on that kind of differential performances both Graham and Klobuchar gave.
So when we ask you where you were on the day, or like what you remember about September 27th, which it is next Friday, by the way, is the year anniversary of this, what happened. I taught in the morning, and then I watched a little bit in my office, and then I had lunch with a colleague, and then I came back and watched some more, and my class on Thursday evening actually is the class that Stephanie trudged to unwillingly, was started at 6:45, and so I caught this Klobuchar exchange, and I also caught the apology, which most people don't know about the apology, okay? And in retrospect, and when I caught the apology, I actually, in the first viewing of it, experienced it actually with a lot of there was a lot of humanity in the apology, because I had known how awful the whole day had been, and I thought, at whatever timestamp it is, I can't remember, these two people actually had a humane exchange with one another after all this had unfolded. And so I said to Keith, I think we really need to investigate this. And then a couple days later, the New York Times article came out saying he had been coached, to do that apology. And I thought that's important to think about what that means, or what's happening there. And also, just for, again, and Melissa and I, when you were talking, we were talking a little bit about why don't you talk about that? Because you made that observation about what happens for Amy Klobuchar at the end in the apology.
So you just talked all about Brett Kavanaugh's apology, which was all over the news, but what struck me about the performance is that Amy Klobuchar apologizes to Brett Kavanaugh, and her telling of her backstory is almost a way of explaining why she, a sitting United States senator, can ask someone about drinking in a case that is all about what happened or allegedly happened when a group of teenagers were drinking to excess. And she feels the need to explain that. And when I saw it, I was like, that is such a woman thing to do. Like, to explain why you're asking the question, and then to apologize for having asked the question, and then explaining some more about why you asked the question that you're now apologizing for asking.
And asking if she can ask the question.
Yes.
Can I just ask it? Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah. And it was jarring to hear it from a man, because I've never heard that from a man.
We'll work on it. There seems to be a question back. Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Theoretically, this hearing was a search for the truth. As you studied your own characters, did you develop a feeling for what the truth was? I don't want to know what you thought, but did you have feelings about what really, really happened by studying all of this?
Yes.
Yeah. I think as actors, we have to believe it, right? We have to believe that that's what happened to us. At least for me, I believe that Blasey Ford had a real experience that was parts of it were incredibly vivid in her mind. And so that had to be real. But I'm sure it's different for every person.
I think the most interesting thing that happened for me was, like I had sort of mentioned before, this connection to his genuine expressions, right? What became clear to me was that his love for his family, the the feeling of being victimized here and his anger were all very genuine emotions for him. Those were real. So what I began to ask is like, there's this strange myth that like a loving family man who is likable and charming couldn't also be guilty of something like sexual assault, right? But what I experienced physically by embodying him was this kind of inner rage, this like, how dare you kind of privilege in my body. I turned to Joe at one point, I was like, it feels like I'm sitting on top of something, like this sensation of, physical sensation of privilege that I have not been privy to in my life. And what it led me to doing was asking sort of deeper questions about, I don't know what happened that night, but I do know that there are some bigger questions we need to ask, like how can this person feel so privileged and so wronged by this accusation? Right. Yeah. So there's a lot to explore, a lot more than we are at the current moment, I think, in the country.
Those were not easy moments in rehearsal. No. I mean, and Susie talked about the embodying of it. I mean, there's the cliche of walking in someone else's shoes, right? We talk about that a lot. Take a walk in somebody else's shoes. And these 6 actors are literally getting as close to that as they can by inhabiting someone's speech and gestural pattern that way. I mean, because it changes the way they're breathing. They literally are breathing differently than they would as themselves. And so there's I would love to do like a science experiment where like I interview Robert and his vitals are being taken, and then I take 3 minutes from that interview, and then I try to replicate it and see if my vitals match his vitals. Like because I wonder if that would be the case. I don't know, but there's something interesting about that for me, about what we learn by sitting in someone else's speech and gestures. I can give you mine right here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask a question that's really similar to what you were just talking about, which is like in the embodiment of these people's, like their mannerisms and their breath, like you were saying, were there any like observations? I mean, I know you talked about this a little bit, but like if all of you or any of you like had any interesting like new thoughts or ideas about like what it's like to experience communication and conversation and like just perception in general when you take up space in a different way, and because like watching this for me, it was just so interesting to see how extremely differently men and women sit and take up space. Like, it's just not something that we think about that is so different, and it really is jarring, like, to see, because part of what made it hard to really be in it was the fact that, like, no man would ever sit like that, no woman would ever sit like that, no man would, like, have his hands in like this. So just what thoughts did it bring up? What feelings did it bring up? Did you ever, like, try sitting like Kavanaugh, like, in public, Yeah.
I can speak to that. One thing that was really alarming for me is the lack of expression on Blasey Ford, and I played Mrs. Kavanaugh as well, the lack of expression. And I have a very expressive, like, face in real life, so it was really hard for me to be like, oh, I want to, like, put all this emotion on them because I know what they're going through internally, like, it's horrible, but their faces just don't move. And that really made me realize that women's emotions are often on trial. Like, our tears can be viewed as manipulative or a sign of weakness, or, oh, you're emotionally unstable, therefore you don't remember, therefore your intellect is not up to par. So these women are trying so hard, and from what I've gathered from my experimenting, they're trying so hard to keep it together, to not let their face betray them in any way, whether it's just showing weakness. So that was alarming to me.
I think I was just going to say that talking about, like, the space that Rachel Mitchell takes up, I found myself when I began the process of investigating Rachel Mitchell, of dealing with my own preconceived notions about what that exact thing. What is a typically like feminine way to sit or a feminine way to act? And it was interesting to deal with the contradiction of the fact that, because I kept dealing with, is this effeminate enough? Does that matter? Is that important? And how does that jibe with the fact that she's like doing this, and sipping on, just making herself right at home. And so it was interesting to process that and and what does that say? That I even have to think about that, right? Like, what does it say that is even a concern? Like, what is not effeminate about taking up the space like that? So it was weird the way that I didn't have to deal with like the stereotypical gendered way of moving, because it kind of matched a masculine way. It was kind of how, and then I was like, do I take up too much space? It caused so many questions for me.
Yes,
I do. The answer is yes.
I think I think we have time for 2 more questions. So let's try to get 2 more in.
Oops.
Initially, I thought the choice to go exactly to the breasts and the gestures, I thought that was really interesting. The most time I've seen verbatim shows, they've just stuck with the words and kind of left the rest up to interpretation. And I think it really highlighted the ways in which men and women perform being the victim differently. Like, what does a male victim look like in this circumstance? Kavanaugh being the one who allegedly didn't do anything wrong versus Blasey Ford saying something wrong was done to me. And so the male victim being very loud, being very aggressive, versus the female victim, like you were saying, being subdued and saying, I'm just trying to say that this happened. I was wondering if there was ever a time in your lab where you didn't go down to the gestures and the breaths, and you just used the words and let those words then change depending on who was doing it. It seemed like a calculated choice here, right? Because you're comparing the genders, but is there a time when you're just doing the verbatim words and then allowing the acting to lead it to different places?
So we are currently doing a project with an organization called the Artist Literacies Institute. We've done it twice now. Some of these actors have participated in it. And we're working with the Democratic primary candidates, where we source, so for example, 10 days ago, Monday, September 9th, before the last set of debates, we sourced policy statements from those 10 candidates on healthcare and climate change, transcribed them in the way that we transcribe, which is the scored transcript that marks their speech pattern, and then we anonymized those transcripts. So we redacted any identifying info. So like when Mayor Pete says South Bend, we redact that, right? So then 10 actors come into the room, and the audience is asked to first vote for, to let us know who they're leaning towards, okay? Then the actors randomly select a letter out of a hat, and they're assigned a set of transcripts. Then we read those transcripts anonymized. The actors don't know who they're reading, nor does the audience, and then the audience votes after they hear those 2 policy statements. Cool. And so, and we've done this twice now, and the results were different both times, shocking both times. And my colleague Andrew Fryband, who's here tonight, has sort of invited us to participate in that project, and we'll be repeating it again in November and hopefully through the election season as a way to help people understand that their choices are informed by content and also identity, right? And not asking people to change their mind, asking people to understand that that's what's happening, okay? And the lab is not about changing people's minds or about being partisan. In fact, we try to be as nonpartisan and non-biased as possible. It's about figuring out why people make the choices that they make and how all sorts of variables affect those things.
And you change the gender and the race of the different.
It's completely anonymous. It's totally random. So Annalisa, who did you read the last?
I played Joe Biden and Andrew Yang.
Okay, and you played?
It was Kamala Harris and then Beto O'Rourke.
And you played?
Harris and Booker.
And you were?
Klobuchar and Bernie.
and you haven't done it yet, and you haven't done it yet, but you're going to soon. So yeah, I'm grateful for Andrew for inviting us to do it, because it's been a huge learning experience already. To your point about like what happens, but I will say the gesture, that's the only space that we're doing that, but we use the word lab specifically because we're experimenting. I mean, Keith and I are really committed to these experiments.
To that point, I wonder what it would have looked like to have Christine Blasey Ford played by a woman of color.
Yeah, great question. Great question. Let's do it.
Don't look at me.
So people often say, well, what would happen if we did this? And I'm like, bring it on. Like, let's do it. Like, if that inspires an idea to do that kind of exploration, we're ready. I mean, we need some money, but we're ready to go, right? Yeah.
I ask because, the obvious comparator to all of this is the Thomas Hill hearings, where Anita Hill's testimony was markedly different from Christine Blasey Ford's. And, David Brock had called her out as a little bit nutty, a little bit slutty, and to, be timid or tentative in that space would have been to make herself incredible. Not incredible, amazing, but incredible as in unbelievable. And instead, she was stoic and staunch, and she was also pilloried for that too, for not showing any emotion.
Yes. And as these hearings were unfolding with Brett Kavanaugh, our stage manager Cassie was researching the Hill-Thomas hearings. Those transcripts are in a file like that. We were looking at those because of this, right? Because of it was nearly 27 years to the day that these hearings were happening, and so these are all. We did see it when Clarence Thomas, because Clarence Thomas was a man of color, right? And so,
but he did a Brett Kavanaugh.
Right. And so how are we experiencing these things? And I would say it would be interesting to apply the social media lens that we have now. Like, what would happen if those Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill hearings were happening under the microscope of social media right now? Because so much of the way that we get narrative is through these media interventions, right? Like, we get the information as fast as the politicians get it in some ways. And so, one final question, and then we really should wrap up and have more food and get you on your way for the evening. We appreciate you being here.
Did he have a beer with his hamburger?
That's a great way to end. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.